So, Rebecca, I have a lot of emails that patrons have emailed us, and I thought we'd read those emails and answer them. Also, you went to the fan page, the Psychology in Seattle Facebook fan page, and inquired that people submit questions for you to answer. So I thought we'd do both emails and these fan page questions. What do you say, Rebecca?
Good. I'm so glad I was proactive.
Yeah. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Rebecca?
I'm Rebecca Bloom. I'm a therapist specializing in trauma. I have a private practice, but I'm full. Go away.
All right, this first email is from patron Megan in Yelm, good old Yelm. She says, I was wondering what you think about therapists with piercings and tattoos. I'm currently an undergrad working towards my LMHC and was wondering if my alternative lifestyle will hinder me in my future career. Rebecca, what do you think?
I've taken my piercings out, and I've just started showing my tattoos in the last 3 months of COVID. I give up. But I had piercings when I started, and I took them out. But that was 20 years ago. This question came up on the queer this group. Interesting. Somebody said, this is the way your future clients will know you're one of them. It's okay. It was actually a question about having crazy colored hair. But this idea that eventually you'll get to work with a community that will be excited that you reflect whoever you are. It might impact, I think, a little bit at the beginning, but depends where you live. Like here in Seattle, I don't think it would impact anywhere. What do you think?
Yeah, be you. I mean, you're right as a human being on this planet to express yourself within a certain range of options, tattoos, hair, piercings, whatever you want to do. It's, be yourself. Having said that, you want to think about how that does affect things. And if you're in the beginning of your career and you're worried that you're not going to get hired or clients aren't going to like you at first, then, I would think about it. But it's not a requirement by any means. And this is something that all therapists have to think about. You have to think about the way you dress, the way your hair looks, what kind of expensive jewelry you might wear. If you're with people who are underprivileged and you're wearing a $10,000 diamond necklace for no reason to work, then what does that communicate to your clients? And
I used to turn my diamond ring around when I worked in certain settings.
Yeah.
And it wasn't big.
So those kinds of things, you think about it, and you think about how it affects things, and you also balance that with your own rights as a human being. Say that you just really love this $10,000 diamond necklace. It's just your thing. And you've thought about it, and you say, well, it might affect some things, but this is really, really important to me. I can't imagine someone saying that, but, more kind of likely is, I love my tattoos, or my piercings are a part of who I am and my identity. Now, for some clients, they're going to be turned off by that. And what do you do with that? Well, you account for it. Usually clients come to talk to someone that listens well, and once you do that, then any kind of peripheral identity marker will be forgotten. But it is something to think about. And for those people who are looking for someone like you, then you're a godsend. For someone with a lot of tattoos and piercings who is looking for a like-minded person, to find a therapist with those visuals might really help them to trust you and feel like they are comfortable. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think especially, there is a way of thinking about therapy that you and I both came into as young therapists, and Generation Z sees things completely differently. I don't think that any of my younger clients would care at all about tattoos. And so I think, it's that world that a therapist is a blank slate is only dying out. And I'm curious in 20 years if we'll ever remember a time that therapists didn't have a public persona and see clients or weren't obviously who they are. I'm listening to a fantastic series of 3 trainings on implicit bias in the therapy room. And the client was talking about, showing up as black in the room, and how it's only white therapists who think that they're not showing up white in the room. And so I think if you do run into trouble with older supervisors, just knowing that, it's their privilege that makes them think that somehow they're a blank slate, and that the client doesn't see all of who they are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that this blank slate idea is essentially white, male, rich, heterosexual slate. It's not a blank slate. And so this notion that somehow a blank slate is quote-unquote looking professional. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, we're talking about conservative haircut, what is considered, I don't know, Nordstrom clothing, if you will, in the formal section, not flashy colors, no piercings, no tattoos. That's an identity. That's not blank. That is a uniform of the privileged. Now, if that's your uniform, then that's fine. But this notion that that's a blank slate, or that's the definition of professionalism, is 100% privileged. So, it's really quite silly. Now, like I said, we're not here to make a statement necessarily in the therapy room. We're here to be inviting to clients, and so you just think about that. What's one of the questions that someone asked you on the Facebook fan page, Rebecca?
So Colin Miller asked something that you and I already...
Good old Colin.
You and I are already talking about this. I'm trying to get in on this show, which is, what do you want to see this podcast tackle next? And I am pulling hard to be on the Avatar Last Airbender version of this show that you do. I'm obsessed with the show. I'm watching it through with my son for the 4th time. And I think all of the messages that it has to give us right now about society and community are super important. So I can't wait for you to finish watching this series so that we can podcast on it.
Yeah, there's just so many things to be watching. And I had been hearing about this show for a long time and thought I wouldn't like it, but then I heard some people like yourself, whom I respect, love it, and then we named our cat Azula, and so I thought, well, I better watch it. But there's so many other things. Colin literally just asked me to watch Ratchet, which is about
which I'm watching it.
Yeah, and other shows that he wants me to watch for the show and for the podcast, and so definitely on the list. But yeah, okay. So when I finally finish that, maybe we'll do a four-peat with Berto, you, and Colin. What's another question there?
So Shoshana asks, she'd like to hear about somatic therapy. And I was curious, with the state that everybody's in, if you and I could just do a demo.
Okay. How?
Well,
over audio, you mean?
Yes. Oh, I've done, yeah. So I'm just going to do a series of questions.
Okay.
To give people a different experience, and maybe I'll set it up a little bit.
Okay.
So Dr. Janina Fisher, if I were to have a guru, it's her. I just kind of follow her around. She was a globe-trotting woman in her 70s. I'm sure she's doing it all from her living room now, but she is the master trauma treatment teacher of our time. And I learned these 5 exercises from her. She is part of Pat Ogden's sensory motor psychotherapy teaching staff. But I don't know the exact origin of these 5 questions, or these 5 somatic body positions that we're going to go through. So what I'm going to ask is for Kirk, you to think about something. And just let me know what the thing is first, if it's negative or positive.
My cat?
Your cat. Okay, so I just want you to think about your cat. While you're thinking about your cat, I just want you to sit up straight. So just imagining that you're spine is erect and your head is sitting comfortably on top of your spine. And just take a few breaths there.
Okay.
And we're just going to see if there's any information there.
I like my cat.
Good. Okay. So we know that you like your cat. Now we're going to think about your cat. You're going to put your hands on your heart. Either one hand, both hand, one hand over the other hand. Just put your hand on your heart.
Okay. I miss my cat. I want to see her.
You want to be with your cat.
Yeah.
So as we touch into our hearts, right, we feel that yearning for closeness. Now I want you to think about your cat, and I want you to put your hands up like in a stop position, and it can be one hand or both hands, way far up, way high out, way to the side, wherever you want to do stop.
I want them to be nice to each other, the two cats.
Mm-hmm.
They're not very nice to each other.
Are they different ages?
Yeah. Well, they're both adopted, so from faraway lands, and so I'm not sure if we know how old the other one is. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, one's a lot older. I'm pretty sure.
And so that's when you're going to put your hands out, like as an act of reaching out to somebody, and you can put it high up or low down. You can put both up. It's up to you. And as you reach out, I want you to think about what you're asking for.
I'm asking for the ability to leave all our doors open so that the cats can roam freely instead of having to section off, territory for the cats and have to constantly make sure that they don't try to, venture into each other's territory without us literally having to watch them. That's what I'm grasping for.
Mm-hmm. I feel that one. This happens with our dogs. We have a 15-year-old rescue, part Chihuahua, part miniature pinscher.
Mochi.
And at some points during the day, she believes that the entire couch, it's this huge L-shaped couch, belongs to her. And then the cute, crazy Lhasa Apso mix, who's a year old, may not even approach the couch. It just causes total chaos in our house. All right, so the last one is you're going to think about your cat and you're going to give yourself a hug. And for those of you who are familiar with yoga, this is like eagle arms. So if you always do one arm over the other, try switching it up. So maybe left over right instead of right over left. And just think about your cat and give yourself a hug.
Well, that's nice.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I think that I'm a good dad to my cats.
Oh, you're a good cat daddy. You need a shirt that says that.
I think I do. I do, actually. I do have a shirt that says that. I think it literally says cat daddy or something. I can't remember. Anyway, that's cool. I like it. Yeah. I mean, the thing about, for those listening, that alternative non-talky, non-verbal therapy things, art therapy, drama therapy. So this is considered somatic therapy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a somatic exercise.
Okay. Because I've seen other things associated with, obviously there's a lot of different things, but somatic therapy, these nonverbal interventions that therapists can use and we can use with ourselves, promote often a new route to getting to emotions and experience and material that talking doesn't, which makes a lot of sense, like the putting the hands up, it was like immediately this somatic, emotional thought process came to mind, and whereas if you just asked me how would you get there, you'd verbally just be like, so what's but just by putting it into words, you already kind of route people. Because what would you say? What's annoying you about your cats? You'd have to put these words to it. But by putting a hand signal out, it's so pre-verbal. It's more primordial of just like get away. It's like it's a 6-month-year-old, 3-month-year-old children have the ability to say no. Before we have words, we have these feelings that we don't have words for right away and are bigger than words. And so that's the benefit of using these kinds of things. That's great. I like it.
Yeah, and also what you're noticing is it seems silly, but each one of those 5 body positions had a different experience with it. And so a lot of somatic work is learning to be open to and to trust the body's own version of the story.
Right.
So that even within our own bodies, we've got multiple stories going on. And this is a great way to explore that. So we did it around the dinner table the other day. And it was, especially if you're doing this with friends and family, they're reaching out and saying what you're asking for. That one has become my favorite these days. And with clients right now, mostly I'll just say, would you like a different experience than what you're having in your head? People are like, yes. So I've gotten, I'm doing all kinds of somatic exercises with folks just to mix it up, because we've talked about this, like this, the fatigue of the day-to-day right now. To put this, we're in late September. We are 6 or 7 months into quarantine. It's grueling.
Yeah, and there's no end in sight.
So there's that.
Yeah. Maybe a year from now, maybe longer, honestly. So upsetting. And anyway, so let's take a break. Let's shed ourselves of this, and when we get back,
shake it off.
Let's continue answering the listeners' questions. What do you say, Rebecca?
I'm ready.
All right, we're back from the break. I have an email here for you that I thought you might have things to say, Rebecca. Anonymous patron says, I have been a 911 dispatcher in the greater Seattle area for almost 10 years. Can you talk about secondhand trauma in medical workers, dispatchers, mental health professionals, etc., and maybe discussing effective ways for organizations to address what their workers are going through, as well as individual strategies and experiences? Rebecca, I know that you specialize in burnout and secondhand trauma, vicarious trauma. So what are some things that organizations can do to help people?
Well, the first off is we used to have time to check in and report out what our experiences were. And what I'm really hearing from more and more jobs is there's just time for administrative tasks, and there's no time to just check in with your supervisor. So the first thing that we can do is just acknowledge that these jobs are hard and they're inherently vicarious traumatizing, if that's a word. There's no shame in it. It doesn't mean that the person has done the job wrong. It just means that we're asking certain members of our society to hold all that is broken in our society. And so the first part is there's all these protocols out there to address vicarious trauma. And whenever I present, I'll just, as I'm going through them, I'll just ask, has anyone heard of this one? Have you ever seen this one before? Has anyone ever done this survey at work? And no one ever has. So I think if agencies could just address it at all and normalize it and create community spaces to talk about it, that would be huge.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot that we could talk about with this. And in addition to that, I would just say organizations could, as you're saying, essentially just acknowledge it, raise awareness. Also, allowing for breaks, both short and long, whether it's just like 5 minutes or maybe the rest of the day, depending on emotionally where someone is at. Making sure that the mental health coverage is good where you're working. Also, like a buddy system, or just checking in with each other or going to coworkers. Because sometimes you don't know, you're in such a state of shock, you don't know that you're actually in need of triage mentally, essentially, and a buddy might be able to detect that, or might be able to give you permission to take a break. when you need to. Essentially, you're a 911 dispatcher, an anonymous patron. Imagine, you don't have to imagine, you've been through experiences where life and death situations, people being injured, people dying, people dead, and you are, having to hold it together. You got to be professional, and you have to be there with them through thick and thin for, several minutes, if not hours, over the telephone. And when the job is done, your body is in a state of emotional and physical distress. And unless you have some way of managing that distress is going to take a toll psychologically and physically. Tons of studies show this, and secondhand trauma, vicarious trauma, burnout, PTSD literally will happen because of this. And organizations, for the most part, anecdotally anyway, and I think research shows this, just ignore it completely. And they create a culture of, quote unquote, being tough, which is ridiculous. It's, as stupid as society saying, like, well, sleep is for wusses or something. Their medical residencies are like this, which is just so stupid. And so it's there's a lot that we need to do. We need to change culture. We need to have to ask an employer to say, you need to allow your employees to take random breaks when they emotionally need to, is to some people anti-American, and so but we need to change things, and some people are. The individual things that I think we can all do is monitor your own distress level, monitor your own emotions. So making sure, a lot of people don't do that enough. Most people don't, in my book. Also, don't be tough, quote unquote tough, be human, be normal. Take breaks, take vacations, find things that you can take joy in. If you are being traumatized all day at work and then you come home and you watch the news, I don't think that's a recipe for wellness. So if you're being in distress all day and you come home, do what brings you joy. Take a break from the ills of the world. Getting good sleep is a big part of it. Talking about it, grieving.
And eating well, too. I mean, I can't tell you how many people come into my office sobbing, having worked a social service job all day, and they want the last way. Always, well, I didn't have time for breakfast, and then I had coffee for lunch. And it's like, well, you're going to feel like crap if there's no gas in the engine. So this sense that the work itself is hard, and, you need 6 grams of protein for breakfast. You need to remember to take a lunch. Like, this work is physically taxing, although you're just talking. Some people are actually responding to emergencies, but you got to keep gas in the engine.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you that are hearing Rebecca's audio kind of clip in and out, we acknowledge it. We know it's happening. Rebecca has worked very hard. We're in the pandemic right now, and normally I would just have people over to my office, and I've spent lots of money on making sure everything's all set up right. But podcasting in the pandemic means over the internet, and so all these various different issues have to be ironed out, and Rebecca has worked really hard, but her internet's just, it's fast.
It sucks.
But it's not fast enough, and so every once in a while it cuts out, and I hope people can forgive us during these troubling times. I'm
giving it all she's got.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about burnout along these lines is to think about your overall career path. A lot of people that I've talked to about this will come to me and they'll just be like, I'm burnt out. I don't enjoy my job anymore. I'm in constant stress all the time. And, we talk about their career, and I find, for example, that 90% of their clients at their agency are sexual assault victims, for example. And, we talk about self-care and they're doing all the things, and yet they still can't sleep at night, and they're still not enjoying their life, and they still don't enjoy their job. And I just say, well, it sounds terrible on a certain level because someone has to help these people, but maybe this sort of population needs to be spread out more. And if your agency doesn't do that, maybe this job isn't the best for you, or really for anybody. And I guess this is another thing organizations can do, is to think about spreading the distress around as much as you can instead of clumping it all together,
Right, and giving people a variety of things to do.
Right.
This idea that one person takes all the heavy duty cases, it's a recipe for burnout.
Right.
The agencies do it because it's easy, but it's this idea of how thinly staffed places are, and if places were in what would be considered now overstaffed, there would be less turnover and it would be more cost effective over time.
Right. And I always say this, and I don't think it'll ever happen, but if we really want to solve this problem, it is allocating tax dollars to this mental health coverage in, your community, such that you can pay people more, you can have more clinicians, you can have better supervision, you can retain people longer, you can allow therapists or, 911 dispatchers to take more time off. And so if we really want to solve the problem, a big part of it has to be putting up money, because you stress out these novice there. Because a lot of times people working at mental health agencies, they're novice because they're just starting out in their career, and usually, not always, but as you progress in your career, you start to realize, I can make 5 times the amount of money with 10% the stress in private practice. Well, sign me up. And that's a problem. And and often what is blamed are the individuals who are doing that, when what we need to be blaming is politicians and voters for not allocating the money for this sort of thing. It's not an individual's fault, Rebecca and me included, for trying to make a living and trying to actually enjoy our careers. If there was enough money in these agencies, we might still be there enjoying our careers there.
Right. So in Washington State, we are especially Seattle area, we are a very high income area, but we have the 14th worst mental health system in the country.
Right.
So the allocations of funds, we're famous for not having enough inpatient beds. And so what happens is people who in another time would be on inpatient receiving wraparound services are at agencies, and the therapist is expected to kind of solve the problem by seeing this client 3 times a week. And so just the actual workload sends people over the edge because the system is so broken.
Yeah. And I get these questions from supervisees and trainees. It's just like, okay, what do I do? And I'm just like, there's nothing you can do. You're a mental health therapist. You're a marriage and family therapist. This person has issues that are way beyond what you can help them with. But, they just keep getting told, well, just keep working the tier. Anyway. So what's another question from the old Facebooks there, Rebecca?
So I'm just it's more of a statement that I made to the group. It's a question I'd wish I'd been asked, so I'm just going to ask it, which is, how are people coping right now, and what is helping? And so I put up on the fan page, at the time, I think it was like a 6-hour playlist. It's now a 10-hour playlist of songs that are helping me get through right now. But I had that question to people, like, what's actually helping? What's getting you by?
Well, what's your number one soothing song?
Boy, what is my number one soothing song? It's actually kind of an angry song. It's Bette Midler's version of "I Will Be Released," which was a feminist anthem in the 70s, and it's as if nothing has actually changed. But that song will always get me dancing and moving when I am feeling pretty numb.
Yeah.
How about for you?
Well, there's so many songs I could say, but sort of a different thing that I've been doing is I'm stuck in my office 24/7, and so I've been decking out my office with all this memorabilia and things that I just want, objects that I want. You know, I don't know if you saw me post on Facebook, you know, Lego things, Star Wars Legos things that I've been buying. And what I've been doing most recently is I've been buying old albums, old, you know, records, vinyl, to hold on to in my hands and look at the liner notes and to smell the sleeve and all that kind of stuff. And so I've been buying old records and just kind of propping them up on my bookshelf to just kind of look at.
Do you have a record player to play them?
No, I used to. So, you know, I held on to records well beyond their, you know, normal lifespan. I was listening to records up until, I don't know, 15 years ago, because before you had Spotify and before you had Napster, you had records because you could go to the used record store and for 25 cents you could buy a record. And so I always loathed paying $15+ just for 10 songs. It just, when I had no money, it just felt like, yeah, I might love those 10 songs, but $15, I mean, I could probably afford one CD every 3 or 4 months, you know? And so that's not how I do music. You know, I do music like I want it all, you know? And so I would have records. And then at a certain point, I just got so tired they were so heavy when I moved. And I just got rid of all of them. I had like, you know, I don't know, hundreds of records, every Beatles album, every Paul McCartney, every John Lennon album, some multiple things. So I don't know. The thing that I'm saying is that how I'm coping with the pandemic is that I am, for me, thinking about how I want my safe space to feel like. I also bought a Battlestar Galactica Viper. You know, the fighters.
Life size.
Yeah. So, you know, if patrons want to know what their money is going towards, it's this sort of thing. I'm also getting a bunch of movie posters for our living room. You know, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Princess Bride, Spirited Away, you know, these kinds of things. And I don't know, it just makes me feel like I'm doing something, and it feels like I think it does scratch kind of an itch that going out would do for me. You know, going to the movie theater and seeing all the movie posters and seeing all the just things in the world. I guess I'm buying the world and putting it in my house. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I've been reading a lot about herbs and their medicinal use and dreaming about making my medicinal herb garden. And then it started raining this week and I actually felt joy because I could go and buy plants and plant them, and I need to find some yarrow, and like, it's weird. Like, so I'm turning my yard into a place I would want to spend a lot of time in, which is something I've never thought about before. But it's like kind of what we need to have to make happen now.
Yeah. All right. You got another question there from the fan page.
Me?
Yeah. Are there any more?
No, I think I've run out.
Oh, okay. So I have lots of questions here. Anonymous patron, she writes in, I just made an appointment with a therapist after reading so many good reviews about him. His Instagram, however, looks like he jumped out of a Right Said Fred video. If you remember the I'm too sexy for my shirt. In 11 out of 28 pictures on his Instagram, he is wearing underwear and showing off his muscles. In one picture, he holds up a sign saying, single after 10 years in front of his naked upper body. Some of the reviews about his therapy practice point out how extremely empathetic he is. Is he overly nice and compensating for something bad about him? I can't tell. He seems immature and attention-seeking. Is that a bad sign? Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a bad sign. That would be a bad sign for me. I don't even like when people's professional photo is a picture of them in the car, that like a selfie. Like that makes me worry. Oops, sorry everyone. I just made a bad noise. Yeah, I mean, I would say if that's what he's putting out into the world, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. I think if you're into that kind of bra culture, he might be a great fit for you. But if you see something immediately on the internet that makes you uncomfortable, yeah, I would say run.
Yeah, well, so for sure. I mean, if you're not comfortable, then right, that's a disaster. Like you need to feel comfortable with your therapist. The relationship has to be good. But to me, this is same as tattoos and piercings. Someone should be allowed to do things within a certain range, and what's different between someone taking Instagram pictures of themselves in their underwear, as as long as it's I don't know, not terrible, and someone taking I have a supervisee right now who actually she is very much into sex positive culture and very much into feminism and very much into body love, self-love. And she takes pictures of herself in bikinis and puts it on Instagram. And it's part of her brand. She just wants people to feel comfortable in their own skin. She's also Black, and she just wants to promote ideas. I don't know if it's working, and you could do some kind of critical analysis of the whole thing, I suppose. But in that me supervising her, I had to really think about that because I haven't had most of the supervisees that I've had tend to be pretty conservative online. And so I haven't really had to think about that question. I was just like, okay, what is the line there? And over time, I just came to the conclusion of just like, well, what we were saying earlier is think about the effect it has on your clients, because your clients, if they do Google you, they're going to come across this sort of thing. The other thing is you can make your Instagram private, by the way. It's not hard to do. But, people should be allowed to live the life that they want to live. And at the same time, you just have to think about how that's going to come across to people. For a man to be super muscly and in his underwear on public, internet forums, for a lot of people, that is going to signal certain things about you, like you're not a very nice person, or, potentially. I'm not saying it automatically means this, but it could mean that it could signal to someone that you're insensitive, or that you believe in certain masculine, toxic ideas that are not going to be appreciated in therapy. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that, of course, but it could signal to people along those lines. And just being, careful about that. The other thing that I'll say is that for clients, don't Google your therapist if you're not going to like what you see. Clients out there, just think twice before you Google your therapist, because there's a chance that a good relationship, potential or current, could be ruined by what you find out. In this, internet is pretty easy to Google, of course, but let's take it further down the road and say, like, well, technically speaking, you probably could figure out where your therapist lives and drive to their house and through binoculars, like, spy on them, right? Now, that from the street, and that wouldn't be illegal, because it's, if you can see something from a public street or something, I'm pretty sure that's not illegal. If you climb a telephone pole and you spy, then I think that's illegal. But the point is that what if you see something that is not going to help your relationship with that therapist? Maybe they like to fart a lot, or maybe they like to make fun of people on the TV when they're at home and you see that, or maybe they're a bit harsh with their kids in a way that turns you off. Well, in those situations, most of us would agree. It's like, well, you probably shouldn't have driven to their house and spied on them, because, yeah, law of averages, you're going to see something that's going to turn you off. So just be careful. You're, of course, free as a client. You have the right to Google your therapist, and it is a curiosity that often people want to have, satisfied. But you just have to be careful around that. Now, for this anonymous patron, it sounds like they're reading online reviews of a therapist. So you just want to be careful about believing those reviews to begin with, right?
Right. I mean, I would say, so people have said, like, why don't you have a presence on Yelp? And those kinds of sites are notoriously really hard for therapists. Usually people only write negative reviews. But I would, therapy usually isn't, it's hard to review a therapist.
Okay, deserving listener. So Rebecca suddenly cut off there, and then we had a conversation over the phone. Turns out she had massive problems with her computer, and so we just gave up, or she gave up. I allowed her to, see if she wanted to figure it out, and she's like, no, I give up. So I thought I'd just end with some patron emails here. Upper tier patron Holiday from Montana, she writes, I'm curious about the mindset of people who are refusing to evacuate due to wildfires, namely the folks who are afraid of Antifa and Black Lives Matter arsonists and looters, and those who believe the government is trying to drive them off their land by purposefully setting fires. How do people let these misguided fears cloud their judgment in the face of massive wildfires? And in the process, they put our firefighters at considerable risk by blocking access roads, brandishing firearms, etc. End of email. Yeah, it's a tough situation. I don't know. It can really be demoralizing sometimes, some of the things that are happening in our society and around the world right now. To be clear, conspiracy theory beliefs are not only in the United States. It's around the world. There are many concerning anecdotes that you can look to. So why do people act this way? Well, there's a number of different ways to look at it. Is it that there's always been misinformed people, but the news just focuses on them more now? Or are there more misguided people these days due to the internet and particularly charismatic conspiracy theorists? Well, it's hard to tell, but research seems to indicate that we have the same rate of beliefs in conspiracy theories now as we did in the past. It's hard to measure that because, what do you consider to be a conspiracy theory? How do you measure the collective belief system in it? Certainly, it seems like it's worse now, but, in my 49 years on this planet, I'm here to tell you that conspiracy theories have always been believed in, and there's always been pseudoscience, and there's always been misinformation. I remember growing up, there was this TV show called In Search Of and the host was Leonard Nimoy. I loved this show, and it was a very popular show back in the day. But it is just filled with pseudoscience, Loch Ness Monster, all kinds of things. And people believed in it. I don't remember anyone saying, I don't know about that. So misinformation, science illiteracy is something that has been common, in fact, potentially more common in the past. But we definitely see a lot of problems. And when I think about this, I think, well, if they've always been around, then, it's just one of those things you're just always going to see. And then I'm less demoralized. But then I think, well, it seems worse now. Then I get demoralized. Then I start worrying about the future because you start worrying about, if we project what it seems to be happening into the future, we're going to have like half of the country just believing in some of the craziest non-scientific ideas known to us, right? So it's hard to tell. I as a person who studies a fair amount of history, I suspect that in 100 years, people of that time and 100 years from now will probably have similar complaints and worries that we do today, meaning that they're worried that the world is going down the tubes and that there's way too much misinformation out there. There's just always been that. So I suspect that that's true. Anyway. But why do people believe these sorts of things? Well, the reason is because this is not my observation, but this is what experts will point to, which is that we don't have enough early education regarding critical thinking and how to understand what's happening in the world. Just think back to your own education that you had kindergarten through 12th grade and think about how much time was spent on particular topics, right? For me, pretty much every year there was a science class. Okay, that's good. But what sort of science did we study? Well, we studied covalent bonds and joules, meaning in energy, and we studied chemistry, and we studied biology. These are all important things, but how much of the class was dedicated to critical thinking and understanding pseudoscience, understanding the scientific method, understanding how to evaluate news stories? I don't remember ever talking about that. Now, I suspect that today there are instructors that are doing that, but enough? I don't think so. I mean, clearly, it's not like the younger generation is somehow immune to pseudoscientific, influence. So I would say if I was education commissioner, I would say let's rework from the ground up how the percentage points that we spend in school. I also think we should spend a lot of time on psychology and development and attachment theory and communication and knowing your own emotions. And these are incredibly important things that, frankly, are way more important than learning calculus. I mean, let's just be honest. Now, to the few individuals that need to learn calculus, then they need to learn calculus. But, it's sort of career dependent, right? Whereas everyone needs to understand pseudoscience, how to read the news, how to think critically, and how to regulate your emotions. Everyone needs to understand that. Anyway, so we need to revamp our education system. I can't imagine that ever happening, though. The other thing we need to do is we need to have better science communication from scientists. That's something that I spend a fair amount of time trying to do from this podcast, is I try to communicate science in a way that is palatable and understandable and interesting. Way too many. When you take all of the people who know stuff, who know specialized knowledge in the sciences, the amount of communication collectively, like per capita, that they put out is probably like one word per scientist per year. Meaning that the vast majority of people that know things do not even attempt to communicate to the public. And that's a problem, because if you're a conspiracy theorist, you love talking about it on the internet. You love spouting your silliness. And so now, having said that, some conspiracy theories are probably true. Very rarely are they, though. The Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy is much more possible. We might not ever know if the likelihood of it is so much more possible because you only needed a handful of people to pull it off. Pulling off like Area 51 or these kinds of, or QAnon, these kinds of conspiracy theories requires literally millions of people to not leak the truth, that sort of thing. Anyway, the other thing is we need accountability for politicians. These are our elected leaders, and they need to lead. And they need to lead in a scientific-based system. And they should defer to scientists and experts when they don't know what they're talking about. And they could harm the public by just spreading misinformation, which is happening a lot more lately. And they can just erode the public's trust in scientists by putting down scientists and acting like they know things. Anyway, so that's one thing. Another thing is we need to stop being hostile to particular groups of people. I don't hear people talking about this. So let's just take the religious right, for example. The religious right, certain groups of them have certain stances like anti-abortion, this kind of thing. And what we do as a society on the left, anyway, which is my tribe, the progressive left, will tend to just put them down, call them hicks and stupid, and they just want to control women, the very hurtful statements. And yeah, there's some rhetoric value to, rhetoric value to saying some of these severe things, but the net effect is that a lot of these people essentially turn away from us, and they probably turn away from science as well. People who believe believe that the world, the universe is 6,000 years old, this kind of thing. To call those people like stupid and idiotic and backward and hicks and, all these kinds of words is hurtful. And what does that do? Well, it just makes them become more insular and more distrusting of what we're saying, which is, there's archaeological evidence, there's geological evidence, there's astronomical evidence. And when we are so mean to them, they just say, well, screw you. I don't trust anything you say because you don't understand me and you're very mean to me. And so we need to stop being so mean. There is so much hostility going on. And for you, anonymous patron or upper tier patron Holiday from Montana, I'm guessing you hate these people who are, brandishing firearms regarding the wildfires. Okay, you're angry, you're upset, and you should be. It's very upsetting. Well, what do we do with it when we're actually in the public forum? Do we rip those people apart and call them, I don't know, terrible names? Or do we try to understand them? Where are they coming from? There was a logical path that led them to where they're at. You just don't understand that logic. I don't understand that logic because I'm not in their bubble. I'm not in their echo chamber. There's a logical reason as to why they're doing that. If we can reach out to them in a compassionate way, I believe strongly that we could actually change the situation. The other thing is we need social media regulations. Social media, I have to say in the beginning of social media emergence, I was on board with a lot of what Mark Zuckerberg was saying. And I'm not fully aware of all the ins and outs of this, or at least what internet people were saying. I remember Silicon Valley people in Seattle saying like, we need to keep the internet free because as soon as you start doing regulations on free speech and all these kinds of things on the internet, then it completely degrades what the internet can provide, which is a free sandbox for us to express ourselves. And we don't want government to get in there. We don't want courts and lawsuits to ruin the internet. And I remember being very on board with that 20 years ago. Seeing what the internet and social media has done, because social media companies are based on profit, they're not based on science or on the public good. They don't care about the public good. What they care about is clicks and making money, selling advertisements. And what we have seen in this experiment that we've done on ourselves is it just further divides us and makes us more likely to be in a massive echo chamber. You go on Google and you Google, say, like, global warming is, and you are in a red state, then it's going to say global warming is a hoax. How Google will finish the phrase for you. Whereas if you're in Seattle, global warming is just based on where you're living, a different autocomplete will be shown to you. Or if you're on Facebook, we all understand this. And so I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't know about, but what do we do about that? I don't know what we do about that. But something has to be done because to go back in time and teach everyone from the age of 5 years old how to not create an echo chamber for themselves, which is asking a lot of people, by the way, is just not possible. So, we're in a very difficult situation. Now, to require or to ask these for-profit organizations to essentially lose money to stop this sort of thing is not likely to happen, or it'll be too little too late or something. So we need government regulations, which sounds very weird, and there's always going to be the next thing that comes out. If you put regulations on Facebook, well, Reddit comes along, and if you put regulations on Reddit, then 4chan comes along, and 4chan decides to try to do something, well, then 8chan comes. There's always going to be the next thing. And I don't really answer to this. I do believe, though, that what we need is much more robust education. I mean, imagine if we spent a half hour a day from the time they're in kindergarten until they graduate from high school, just a half hour a day, or let's just say an hour a week. I imagine a lot of people could probably swallow that. An hour a week. So, how many weeks do you have in the year, in a school year? Something like 35 or something. So you have 35 hours a year of training for kids on how to think critically and how to avoid falling into internet echo chambers and being brainwashed, essentially. I imagine that we would be able to curb this quite a bit. So until we do something like that, I just can't see this changing. The other thing that I have this fantasy in my mind that certain politicians will come forward. Like, imagine if, this is just a fantasy, but imagine if George W. Bush and Barack Obama got together. I think that they're kind of friendly these days. and maybe Michelle Obama. The three of them get together and they create like a YouTube channel or something. And every week they release another 20-minute little video where you bring Republicans and Democrats together and you say, hey, everyone, we are concerned about the state of the country right now. And here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to start from the beginning. We're going to talk about how to not fall into an internet echo chamber. And both Republicans and Democrats agree that we have a problem on our hands. So, because I think what that would do is Republicans would be like, oh, really? So I can listen to George W. Bush. I like him. And then Democrats, oh, I like Barack Obama. I'll listen to him. Because any effort to educate the public will likely be seen as a partisan effort. You know, if someone comes forward and says something, unless you appeal to both sides, one of the sides is going to see certain signals that are going to, cue them of like, oh, that's the enemy, and so I have to avoid that. Anyway, I doubt that'll ever happen. So, but what I'll tell people is if you're not aware, and because I actually was talking with a friend that doesn't live in Seattle. And this was a few months ago, and she was like, "Oh, how's Antifa going in Seattle?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Certain echo chambers are basically, and I think Trump even called Washington State or Seattle basically like an anarchy state or something. It's not. I can't even tell you how ridiculous that is. So, if you live in an echo chamber where you believe Seattle is some sort of anarchy or there's some kind of problem that's happening here, there's nothing happening. There's no problem. There were some very, very isolated issues during the Black Lives Matter protests between police and protesters. 99.999% of what was happening was completely peaceful and wonderful. And if you were there, you would have been like, oh, it's no big deal. It's definitely not what the news is talking about. So, are there isolated issues? Yeah, sure. But like Seattle is there's thousands and thousands of people doing many different things. And so whatever kind of fears is in your echo chamber about Seattle anarchy is just utterly ridiculous. And don't believe the news, people. Don't believe the news. Not even CNN or Fox News or whatever big name you follow, like particularly those. Anyway. The other thing I'll say is that we live in a society with a lot of different ideas, and that's always been true. And there's been various different solutions to that. You can have a dictatorship where you basically just kill or suppress the opposing points of view. You can have a society that doesn't have a free press. You can have societies that are even, where you sort of bifurcate things, where you say, okay, you people go over there and you people go over there. And there's a lot of different systems. Well, we live in a system in the United States where we are set up on freedom, on the ability to think and however you want to, and to say, for the most part, whatever you want to post whatever you want to, for the most part, and to propagate ideas. And so you're always in a society like this, you're always going to have fringe ideas. It's just human nature to do that. Can we curb it with the same things that I said? Yeah. But you're never going to get rid of it. It's always going to be around. And so there's always going to be people. So no matter what we did, there's always going to be a small group of people who believe that the wildfires are being caused by the government and that they should stop the firefighters with brandishing weapons. There's just always going to be that, and it sucks. And, we should address it, and we shouldn't just give up. But I find that a lot of people get so demoralized by this. Because the other thing you want to think about is, what is your echo chamber feeding you in terms of bad news about the others, right? Really take an inventory, maybe every time you see something negative about the other side, write it down, because it's not as if you have to consume those news stories. And think about what it's doing to your brain, because you could be being brainwashed by the notions that other people are being brainwashed. So if you consume a lot of news about the scary other people, they're being brainwashed they're being brainwashed to block access roads for the firefighters. A brainwashing mechanism caused them to logically do that. And now you're paying attention to all those stories, and you're being brainwashed into believing that those sorts of things are probably more prevalent than they actually are. And maybe even what's actually happening is being blown out of proportion. In the same way that Antifa is being, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that. Anti-fascist. Yeah. Is it Antifa or Antifa or Antifa? I don't even know that, for a Seattleite to not even know how to pronounce that word, should tell you something. Anyway. So take an inventory of what you're being exposed to, because honestly, I have really protected myself from certain echo chambers on the internet in either direction, because when I don't do that, I become very depressed. Literally, it's very sad. It's demoralizing. It just makes you feel like, what's the point in living? I mean, look what's happening in the world. And every once in a while, I'll bump up against one of those people, and they'll just be like, "Oh, the world is just so depressing. I can't stand it." And the people are literally suicidal because of what's happening in the world. And yet, I'm walking around and I'm like, "Yeah, I love life. People are great. People in Seattle are great. People in Dallas are great. People in Washington D.C. I believe people are good. Am I right and the other people wrong? I don't know. Are the other people right and I'm wrong? I don't know. But I love the world, and I love people, and I love what's happening. And yes, there's a few misguided people who are doing bad things, and that's always been true. But life is a joy, and people are a joy, and people are great. And when you meet people, they're wonderful. And the arc of society bends towards justice, as it always has and as it always will. I believe that. I believe in those things. So why do I believe in those things? Well, I don't know. I just believe in people. I believe in you. I believe in others. I believe in the people that I don't agree with. I've met them, and I think that they're good people. I've had, I've talked about this before, but one of the influential people that influenced me to even start this podcast 12 years ago was a guy named Jason Graves, a friend of mine from my childhood. And he's a big media guy. He has his own TV show situations, and he was very popular in the media. And in 2008, I was going to lunch with him, and I had this idea of I want to start this podcast. And he was so nice to me and so encouraging that it pushed me over the edge. And then I started the podcast soon after that. And he is a conversion therapist who believes that gay people are sinning and they're going to hell, and they need to be converted into straight people. So this guy, Jason Graves, one of the most famous conversion therapists, I like him. I know he's a good person. And yet he is doing one of the most horrific, ugly, terrible, unethical, immoral things that I can think of. To try to change someone from who they are into something else based on a 5,000 or I don't know how, a very old bigoted idea that has killed people, and continues to kill people. The notion that gay people are wrong or gross or disgusting or, against God or unnatural is literally resulting in deaths. And it is like unscientific and just immoral at its core. And yet, this guy is a good person. So what do we do about that? Well, we try to appeal to them, and I have. And I'd like to think that my ranting and raving and soapboxing and arguing with him, but believing in his goodness, has led to some doubt in his mind as to his beliefs. It's been a while since I've checked in with him on this, but I believe in that person who is blocking access roads for the firefighters. I believe in that person. I believe that they're good, and I believe we can reach them. And if I can't convince you of that, that's fine. I'm not trying to, but I'm just telling you that there's a road forward, and demoralization and otherizing is not the road forward, I believe. Anyway, I thought I'd answer more emails, but you know me, I can rant and rave and talk forever. So that does it for that episode in which we talked with Rebecca and she suddenly got cut off. And then I finished off the episode by alienating all the people in certain echo chambers that don't like what I have to say. So be it. I try my best. Everyone out there, and let me know what you think. I'm curious. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others, really, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.